Hi, I'm Timothy Hogan. I'm here with my friend Ramses, and I'm here today to talk to you about alchemy in ancient Egypt and the secret of alchemy that the Templar order discovered in their explorations there. Of course, people know about the Knights Templar. They mostly think of them as having spent a lot of time in Jerusalem and Palestine and other areas of the Holy Land, uh, Constantinople or Istanbul. But what most people don't know is that they spent a tremendous amount of time in Egypt. In fact, one of the first places that they went to, as they were sought to find they're trying to trace down the origins of civilization. They believed that there was something to the flood myths associated with Noah, and that there was a great cataclysm in antiquity that wiped out a civilization. There were several different traditions that spoke of this, and that also spoke that this previous civilization had advanced technology. And so the Templars were trying to find the remnants of where this technology was preserved and where the philosophies from this ancient civilization were preserved. Of course, one of the main places where it was preserved was in Egypt. Dynastic Egyptians went to great pains to try to preserve sites that had been built prior to them, that had been, incredible technology, advanced technology had been used to build. In fact, the whole area of the Giza Plateau, all the way into Saqqara, had an ancient name of Ras Tau. That was the Egyptian name for it, Ras Tau. This later, as it got translated into the Greek and the Latin languages, came to be associated with rose cross, because Ros was another name for rose, and Tau was another name for cross in these languages. So, of course, this is the mystery of where the term Rosicrucian and the whole Rosicrucian movement that came out of the Templars really started was in Egypt. The Templars had gone down into places like Dendera, Abydos, Luxor, Edfu, Philae, where they had their headquarters, Esna, Elephantine Island, and other areas. And they were specifically looking for the secrets of this ancient civilization. At these areas, they found evidence of arcs that had been used in antiquity. And I say arcs, I'm talking about like Ark of the Covenant. There were multiple arcs that were used in Egypt. And inside these arcs were placed manna, this is what the Bible says. But the Templars realized this manna was an alchemical substance. So they tried to trace down and find the traditions that were preserving how to make this manna. And they came to associate with groups like the Sabaeans, which, by the way, get their names from Saba, Sabaeans. That word Saba in ancient Egyptian just meant stargate. So these were people of the Stargate. And at all of these locations that I mentioned, as well as others throughout Egypt, there are these talks of these stargates that were tied in with this alchemical process. So they worked with the Sabaeans, they worked with the Druze, also known as the Tawhid Mohadun. They worked with what was to come to be known as the Sufi traditions, Islamic traditions, mystic Islam. And they also worked with the Kabbalists and others, Jewish Kabbalists, all of whom were preserving aspects of this tradition. They went into places like Lebanon. They found the remnants of the Canaanite traditions of the ancient Phoenicians, and they took all this knowledge and tried to figure out what it all meant alchemically. There were a couple things that they found in their research in Egypt in particular, but then also associating with these different groups. First of all, there was a secret salt that could be extracted from ashes that was known as the hidden mana. There was a soluble salt and an insoluble salt that could be extracted from ashes, and the insoluble salts were known as mana, and what they were is they were monoatomic atoms, and then the soluble salts were usually minerals that the plant or whatever was being worked on contained. They learned how to extract these things, and in fact the Templars had a ceremony that they created known as the sharing of the salt ceremony. And this was something that was tied into their communion rite. That the salt was the bread, and it was made up of these minerals and these monoatomic atoms. And in fact, they also preserved a part of their ceremony in which they presented usually the candidate with a white stone. And there was a great mystery associated with this white stone. The white stone represented the mana. It represented this great alchemical secret. And it was the white stone found in Revelations. It says, "To he who overcometh will be given the hidden mana and the white stone." So this is one of the things they found. The Sufi as well also had a sharing of the salt ceremony that they gained from the Templars, as well as the Hashishin, who the Templars had associations with in places, particularly like Tripoli and other places like that. All of them were passing on these alchemical mysteries. So this was one of the great secrets that it was included in the Templar communion rites, was this secret salt that was known as mana. They had a history of it. The family members who started the Templar order largely came out of the Albigensian faith of southern France. And the Albigensians, also known as the Cathars, had passed on many of the doctrines of the Manichaeans from the great philosopher Mani, who had come out of Egypt and who had taken his name, Mani, from the mana itself. In fact, this same word Mani, which just meant precious stone or sometimes precious white stone, it got carried over all the way into Tibet. And this is where you find, Manichaeans had made their way into China and into Tibet, these Gnostics. And this is why, even to this day, that you find the Tibetan chant of Om Mani Padme Hum. Om being the word of creation, Mani being the precious white stone or the precious jewel, as it's sometimes referred to as, Padme being the opening of the lotus, in particular the crown lotus, the crown chakra, and Hum is the completion. So this was the process of awakening to enlightenment or to gnosis. But this was something being passed down by the Templars as well. They gained this via the Manichaeans, the Albigensians, and other Gnostic traditions that they were associated with. One of the other groups in Egypt that they came to be associating with is there were alchemical traditions that were passing on some of this knowledge in Egypt. To this day, if you look at the temple walls in Egypt, it's not uncommon to see images of the pharaoh presenting a cone-shaped bread, cone-shaped white cake to the god, usually Osiris, or Amun, and he has the heaven plumes of almond, and it's being offered as an offering, and it's mentioned in the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or the Egyptian Book of Coming Forth into the Light, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day is another translation of it, in which it talks about this special substance that the gods fed on and that the pharaohs fed on. And it says things like, I am white, I am pure, what is it? I am like that in which your hair stands up on your arms after a lightning storm. What is it? I'm the force for this. And it's all describing this special white cakes, and they refer to it as what is it? Well, in Hebrew, mana means what is it? So this is one of the great alchemical secrets. And here's some mana here, actually in this container. Maybe a little hard to see, but it's just a white powder, and it can be extracted pretty much from everything. This is one of the secrets of the Templars that had been being preserved, and it was one of the secrets associated with the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail wasn't just a bloodline; it was a tradition that was preserving these alchemical and Gnostic ideas. And the Gnostics and the alchemists largely went hand in hand, even up into the Middle Ages. You'll find many of the great alchemists throughout history chose their names based off of ancient Gnostic saints like Valentinius, Basil Valentine, for example, is a perfect example. Well, Valentine or Valentinius is named after the Gnostic saint Valentinius or Valentine, who was one of these Gnostic saints in the Gnostic church tradition. And I've given another presentation on Gnosticism, so Templars and Gnosticism, so we're not going to go there. But what I want to emphasize here is that there was a tradition being preserved, and this is something that the Templars started to bring back to Europe. They took this knowledge that they were seeing on the temple walls of Egypt, they brought it back to Europe, and then they started to incorporate it onto the cathedrals that they were building. So the walls of the cathedrals of Notre Dame around France and parts of Germany and other areas, they incorporated these alchemical ideas on them. And they built them in the same manner that the Egyptians had been building their temples. They were trying to emulate the science and preserve the knowledge of it, just like the Egyptians had done thousands of years previously. So the ancient Egyptians. So it was and what they were trying to do was preserve something from the ancient world, a science from antiquity, from the pre-flood civilization that was believed to be preserved in Egypt. They also came to believe that the myths associated with Osiris, Osiris was painted green, and then he was chopped up. He was tricked by his brother Set, and he was chopped up, and he was thrown into the Nile. And Isis went out to look for him, and turned herself into a bird, and flew around him, and did incantations, and then lit incense and oil lamps, and then raised, with the help of Sekhmet, the lioness, raised Osiris back from the dead. This whole process was believed to allude to not only the journey of the soul itself as it went through life, but also alchemical operations. And when he was painted green, it represented he was the vegetation god. So it was chopping up the vegetation, With the first part, throwing it in the Nile represented digesting it in the liquid. The bird, turning into a bird represented distillation. And ultimately then the oil lamps and the things like that are the lighting of the incense and so on and so forth represented the calcination stage in which they raised him back to life, back to the oneness, which represented not only coming back into the oneness of the greater order of things, but also forming the perfect elixir. Tied in with this process is there are certain plants within Egypt that if you do these stages to, for example, there's a plant that scientific name today goes by the name of dictapetulum, and it is a plant that grows throughout Africa, something that the Egyptians had easy access to. It's something that's to this day grows near the monuments. And if you do these processes to this particular plant, part of what you extract out of it is hydrofluoric acid. Well, hydrofluoric acid eats through granite, the silica and the granite. So you can use it to cut stone. And you can use it to etch granite as well. In fact, you could create a wash using this hydrofluoric acid in order to etch the granite. And the only thing that stops it is beeswax and gold. So you can imagine you could actually create you could put beeswax over a stone and then carve into the beeswax what you want burned into, and then pour a wash of the hydrofluoric acid over it, and it would just eat at the stone where there wasn't any wax. And then you could wash it, get the wax off, and you'd have a perfect etching on this granite. This is one of the great secrets to how the Egyptians were doing this. This is how they were etching the stone. This is how they were making it perfect. And by the way, this is, I believe, and the Templar tradition is believed, of which I represent, that this was one of the real secrets for how they were cutting the stones, these granite stones. I mean, people, particularly some of the granite that's found within Egypt, some of the boxes and some of the statues and so on and so forth. I mean, it's some of the hardest stone on planet Earth. And supposedly the Egyptians only had copper tools, which wouldn't even cut that granite. So we need to ask ourselves, how did they get it with such precision? And there's some people that say, oh, must have been extraterrestrials or lasers or some other technology like that. And I'm not going to throw all that out. Sure, there's a possibility to that, but there's also a very real possibility that they were using hydrofluoric acid. They were extracting from the dictapetulum, and which is, by the way, also depicted all over the place in the hieroglyphs around Egypt. So they were clearly aware of this plant, the use of it, and I'm sure they were using it to extract the hydrofluoric acid to burn away at the granite itself. So it just eats away at the silica that's within the granite. So this was one of the great secrets. They also, by the way, had to use this hydrofluoric acid to eat away at harder substances that they were trying to extract the secret salts out of. Because you could extract this mana or the secret salt out of just about everything, but you have to be able to break it down first. And so this was a way and a means to do that. So hydrofluoric acid was one of the great secrets of the ancient world. I believe it was this secret of alchemy was probably passed down from the pre-Diluvian civilization. We find it being utilized all over the ancient world. We find it being found in India, in China, in Egypt. We find it in the Americas. The giant stones at places like Pumapuco and other places like that, Sacsayhuaman and others. These were all cut with such precision, and this could have been done using hydrofluoric acid. So I believe this was one of the great secrets, and it was certainly one of the, you had to use that acid in order to liberate the monoatomic elements, the mana, out of not only other metals, but as well as just hard substances. So it was one way to do that. So this was a great secret in the ancient world, and I am confident within time Egyptologists are going to prove me right in this, and that they've also found wax, beeswax, on monuments in Egypt, and they've always wondered, like, why is this beeswax there? And they found evidence of the pockmarking from acid. They just haven't put the two and two together. So this will be something that'll be revealed a lot more, I believe, in the years ahead. I'm talking about it now because otherwise someone else is going to take credit for it down the road. But this is something that has been one of the great secrets within alchemy. These ideas of alchemy, and I should also say, tie in completely with the word alchemy itself. Comes from alchem or alchemit, which was the ancient name for Egypt. In fact, chemistry comes from alchemistry, which comes from the land of Chem or Kemet, which was ancient Egypt. So this was the science of Egypt that was passed down, and it was utilized in all kinds of different functions. I mean, once you had the basic steps of digestion, distillation, and calcination, you could, in fact, once you had these stages, you could apply it to everything. You just needed to use a different solvent each time. So for metals, you had to use acids. For certain herbs, you had to use alcohol solvents. In some instances, you could use water solvents. But in all instances, you had a liquid solvent that you were digesting the substance in to extract out the pure essence that you want. And this was one of the real secrets to. There's an alchemical text known as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, which was supposedly discovered at Siwa. Was discovered. It was believed to be buried at Abydos by some traditions, and was associated with Osiris, the burial place of Osiris. Of course, Abydos is the Osirian. I believe this is where they were collecting the raw substances that were needed in order to do these alchemical processes. That's certainly what the temple walls in Egypt allude to. And by the way, at Abydos itself, there are private chambers that depict not only the alchemical operations, but the arts, and there's Templar graffiti there as well, because this is from the 1200s, because this is where the Templars were figuring all this stuff out. They brought it back to Europe. They incorporated it on the cathedrals. They passed it on secretly within certain traditions. Later on, by the late 1500s, early 1600s, as the Templars, after the Templars had been suppressed and continued to exist underground, they formed traditions like the Militia Crucifera Evangelica in Germany, in the area of Tübingen, in the district of Württemberg, And really, this is where what was to become known as the Rosicrucian movement came out of. Of course, the Rosicrucians, those of the Rose Cross, the Ross Tau, were passing on these alchemical traditions and also these Gnostic and Kabbalistic ideas. They all tied in and were telling the same story. So this is part of the tradition of the Templars. The Templars also, prior to their suppression, there is records of them having a special vessel known as the vessel of the Rose Cross, which was said to contain a magical elixir of some kind that came to be associated with the Holy Grail. This was just, again, an alchemical substance. One of the other things that can be done with this mana is if you tweak it slightly, you can turn it into a red substance, which became known as the Red Lion, and also became known as the Blood of Christ. It became known as the Blood of Christ because it looks and tastes like blood. It's not blood. It is in no way really blood, but it does have this miraculous healing ability, and stimulates consciousness. So again, this was also part of the Templar communion ritual. There are certain Templar traditions, including the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, of which I represent, and the Templar Collegia, and the Order Martiniste of the Temple, who continue to pass on this alchemical knowledge and to use these substances in alchemical communion rites to this day. We believe that this was the origin of the communion rite, in fact, and that it was only later they substituted it with bread and wine because the church didn't know how to make these substances. So, but the alchemical substances is something we find, again, going back into the ancient Egyptian temple walls, and continue to be preserved. So within the tradition, the Templars figured it out, and then not only from associating with other groups, but from their own traditions that they had were passing things on, and then it just became a part of their tradition, and it continues to be a part of the tradition to this day. So these are some of the mysteries associated with the alchemical science, certainly as it ties into Egypt. And this is something that if this excites you and you're interested in this, I will just point out that I will be doing a number of tours in Egypt coming up here. And you can go to Saba Tours. That's S-A-B-A, Saba, which means Stargate, if you recall. Saba Tours. If you go to their website, you can find the Egyptian mystery tours that I'm going to be doing with Muhammad Ibrahim and Johnny Enoch, and where we explore these mysteries. We show you these sites around Egypt, many of these areas are closed to the public and require special access. And so we get you in to see them. And as a special treat, we also give you some of this mana while you're on the trip so that you can experience it for yourself. And we'd love to have you along for it. I'd also like to point out this particular video is being brought to you by my dear friend Michelle Hood and her light to light orgone pyramids. And we have some different ones. It's like the light pyramids, and they got the different orgone pyramids. We can't really talk about alchemy without mentioning orgone. Orgone as being this life force energy, and she's found a way to capture it, and in through these pyramids, and that's something that she has available, which is wonderful. I'd also like to point out as well the PYD salts. This is a different company manufactured by Holistic Incorporated or holistic.com, and these are special salts that have been charged with energy. They're Himalayan salts that have been charged with energy, filled with good intentions. A little bit can be added to any food or drink to bring about positive energy. So those are the two sponsors of this video today, and I hope you go to their websites and check them out. And we hope to talk to you again soon.